Welcome back to the Virtual Reality Reconstructionist, where we explore the innovators reshaping forensic science, public safety, and immersive training. Today, we're joined by TJ Dishaw, the CEO and founder of Peerless VR, a company designing high-performance VR training simulators built especially for law enforcement, public safety, and criminal justice programs. Peerless VR's headset operate at the edge of what VR hardware can do. Enterprise-grade optics, reinforced bills, high-frequency tracking, active cooling, hot swap batteries, and high-fidelity pass-through. Improved GPU pipelines and customized integrations paired with industry-leading hardware partners. TJ is not just building hardware, he's building an ecosystem engineered to change how law enforcement training is conducted. TJ, welcome to the show. Hey, welcome, TJ. We're here with a segment of the Virtual Reality Reconstructionist. How are you doing today?
Great. How are you?
Good. I want to start off by welcoming you to the podcast, and I'll thank you for your contribution. And I think we're going to have a great segment here. We'll start off with some questions and move through them as well as we can. So the first one is, take us back to your beginning in this industry, and what problem did you see with the VR space that pushed you to build Peerless VR from the ground up?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's definitely a long-winded one, just because I'll absolutely have to give you some background on really how I've landed here throughout the years. So prior to founding Peerless, in 2016, when I was 21, I had just gotten my first HTC Vive. You're probably aware, but maybe not everyone else. It was the first real virtual reality headset. You know, you had the Oculus CV1 after Facebook had acquired Oculus. So that came around the same time, but both were pretty much the first. Once I got into that, I was already obsessed with technology, but VR as a technology became super eye-opening. I saw a lot of opportunities with it, and it was just truly mind-blowing. Yet everyone I showed, even if it was my family, friends, it was like nothing I've ever seen. So I was trying to look for a good application. So myself and my friend at the time started doing some soul searching and just trying to find, again, where we could apply it. And I had a family member in law enforcement. They tipped us off into looking into how that could benefit their training. So after a year of this and whatnot, essentially I had co-founded Apex Officer in 2017. So as cliche as it sounds, my co-founder and I at the time quit our jobs, dropped everything, and went full heads down, full time, learning the industry. You know, I was never in law enforcement, especially at that age, obviously, and just was fairly ignorant to it. So I started solo developing the simulator 60 hours a week just to get something to function, right? And I promise I'm going to answer your question. But upon further digging into law enforcement training simulators, we realized just how dated the technology was. All simulators at the time, and still very commonly to this day, surprisingly, are all projector-based. And essentially, they play videos on them, and the trainer or instructor running it has a branching option or two. You know, he pulls out a gun, or he pulls out something else, or nothing, or a cell phone, and complies, whatever it is. So very basic, and we're talking worse than duck hunting technology in a way. Especially in the video aspect. So it is essentially basic shoot or don't shoot. That was already fairly eye-opening, but the biggest epiphany had was months down the road when we had the sim somewhat functioning very early on. We had the opportunity and we're trying as best as possible to put it in front of many law enforcement agencies, professionals, etc., just to get feedback. You know, what are you folks actually looking for? Does this work? Does this make sense? Etc. And you got to imagine I'm 22 at that time as well. Very young, very naive to the world. So I was just trying to be open-minded and learn a lot. So to answer your initial question, the takeaway I had was from a lot of that initial feedback. Yes, what problems did you see in the space? Not only had simulator technology not been innovated on in over 20 years, realistically, all things considered, but the methodology of how the simulators actually train people was insanely limiting with that video-based content, with it being so static, so on rails. Folks are going to go through the simulator once or twice and going to know what's going to happen. There wasn't much training value after that first use. So while people were blown away by VR, I mean, just mind blown. Every person I put in a headset was floored that this thing even existed. They were more, as they tried it out and got more familiar with it, they were more blown away about what the technology enabled them to do on the interaction side. And I think it's a small facet, but a big piece as well of why VR is so powerful. To give you a little bit more insight on that and a little bit more backstory to get to the Peerless part, you know, we realized, moving to virtual reality was absolutely a necessity. And it was a necessary step for training simply due to immersion and interaction aspects of the tech. But what it allowed us to do is encompass a larger, drastically wider scope of variables when it comes to decision making. And that goes obviously in any kind of enterprise VR context. We can put them in a hyper immersive experience, and with it being software based, you just kind of being there. It's always the way I describe virtual reality to people. It just adds so many more things to it that you can do. So upon learning this, we made Apex Officer go way beyond simple use of force in several different ways. The trainer, for example, could speak for the suspect. You talk into a mic, it moves their mouth. It's mostly your voice, and it enables real two-way dialogue with a trainee. No simulator to this day even does that still. And the scenarios weren't scripted with simple branching options like you've been seeing in projector-based sims, and ultimately just lets the trainer conduct the training they wanted, not pre-scripted content that was given to them by a vendor. And it's been a big mindset. To kind of capstone that and give you a little bit more to your answers or your questions still. Years went by, we were wildly successful at Apex Officer, essentially became the most used VR sim across the US for most of the company's life. And then come 2024, companies' motives really moved more towards profit than driven by innovation. And it's obviously a huge issue. I've had the fear that the company was becoming the problem I was essentially trying to solve. Come in and not only leverage new technology, but listen to the end users. What do they actually want? What applications can we use of the tech itself? And long story short, I decided to part ways. I felt compelled to do so. It was a necessity. So 3 days later, literally, company doors were locked. All the employees were essentially let go, and Apex Officer started shutting down and is obviously now shut down. So in January, I, with many former team members from Apex, started Peerless VR. So I wanted to take all the knowledge and experience I had gained, all the insight I've had from working with literally thousands of law enforcement agencies over 8 years in an industry I essentially created to continue towards my vision of building the ultimate law enforcement training tool possible. So outdated tech, I'm not really innovating, and again, just not listening to the end users. You can take any technology and do whatever you want with it, but just because it's next generation or high tech doesn't actually give it true application. It's the application aspect of it, I think, when most enterprise VR vendors fall short. So long-winded, but I want to get all that out of the way.
Oh, you're good. You're good. That's obviously you're passionate about that and what's going on, which I think is a big part of this transition, right? Is you're getting electronics and virtual reality into law enforcement and all about training. They just don't know enough about it. So I see what's interesting is your explanation there is a lot of what I see being on the other end, the law enforcement trying to get into VR, right? You're coming from different directions to try to meet in the middle is, I saw those, screen simulators. I thought, wow, this is good stuff. And like you're saying, it's limited, right? And then, as I retired and went into education with my PhD, I realized that, you know what, the dynamics of law enforcement training, and we do live scenarios. Eventually we got to that point, was to get that dynamics, right? Things change so quickly and officers need to understand that and be able to adapt. So even though it's a great tool, it's like anything else, it grows. But I think even with that, even if you have one of those products, you should grow with the industry and change with the technology, right? You made those points in your response. I think your driving force to get to a better, I commend you for that, because that's usually that ends up in a very good place as far as an industry if you're doing it for the right reasons and for the right people. And I know in our conversations in the past, you already mentioned it once, was listen to the customer. What do they see and what do they do? They don't in law enforcement. They're usually give you feedback, and if you listen to it, it's usually right on. They really are telling you what they need, right? And they may not know exactly how to get there. They just know this is better. And that scenario-based training has evolved that way. And this is now one of those options of getting them there. Like recently at the police academy, I was able to do some testing and realize that give them virtual reality and give them the ability to do some of these things. And then at the end of their academy, be able to do live scenarios and truly test is a big thing. Right now, they're doing live scenarios, but it's really just to get them accustomed to what they're fixing to get into, right? They just have so much they can, a lot of them are in their 20s and they just have so much life experience that they can fall back on. But now if you do, they do 6 months of the academy and they get these things, now those live scenarios really mean something. It really means that they can apply those skills, not just hope they remember them in the heat of the moment. So,
right.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, and we'll get to some of these topics in a little bit. So, great response, and I appreciate you being able to share that with us. I'm sure we can find in each industry somebody that had to do that and make the adjustment to, level up the level up their desire. I mean, I did similar things. It was retirement and going into, some way of interacting with law enforcement. It just wasn't going to be in the field anymore, right? I'm going to do educational technology. What can we do for law enforcement to get them to the next level?
Absolutely. Yeah. And
Yeah,
that, a lot of what you're saying
great.
is definitely resonating too, especially on the, like you said, the passion piece, just to touch on that. I'm very passionate what I do, and likewise for my team. You even mentioned in a way, I think you almost implied there, you wanted to still stay involved with law enforcement, like you said, without being out in the field. And that's how many of my employees feel. I have several employees that are former law enforcement, several that were actually past customers and users of Apex Officer, my former simulator. And they all kind of thought the same thing in a lot of ways. They want to still be able to give back despite their, career finally coming to an end and them being able to retire. They still want to be able to stay involved and be able to get back. So definitely resonates. And I know they would agree with you on that.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. And that kind of bridges a gap, right? I think you're seeing it, with the leadership and technology, and build that with some law enforcement knowledge, that you end up with a product that could help, public safety, which is where you're trying to go.
That's the goal.
So, in your words, how would you define enterprise grade virtual reality, and why do you think public safety and like military clients demand systems that go beyond just a consumer-based concept? Kind of touch on that for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. Generally, it's kind of piggybacking a little bit on my previous ramble I just went over about the application aspect rather than the technology itself. The tech is available. The tech's actually, in most contexts, until you go Lockheed Martin, super multi-million, $100 million, billion-dollar contracts with the DoD, I think most would be surprised by the idea that the technology actually starts with consumers. There's, funny enough, more money there, right? All the simulators you look at today, whether it's ours, which is the most cutting edge, the most next gen end technology, let alone all the way down to the other ones. I mean, they're all technology that's still available to the consumer, and it starts with that. So it comes back to the application piece. Again, can you simply apply it? So for example, a lot of people ask me, well, can I use this on my Meta Quest 3, right? It's the newest headset from Meta. Facebook came out like 3 years ago. It's pretty much in parity with the headset we use on technology itself, but you can't use that headset because it's built by Meta. So there's a lot of roadblocks. You have to have a Facebook account. It needs to be on the internet here and there. Stuff like that is simply impractical. So again, coming back to the application, anyone can use it, but it's having a team that deeply understands the technology. And again, I know it's cliche to keep saying, but listen to your end users. What do they actually want? And a big piece of that is actually almost nothing to do directly with what most people see in the tech. It's going to be the practicality, right? So can I set up my simulator really fast? Can I alleviate the bottleneck? Most sims, I'll put it this way, everything but Peerless, when you go and set up your simulator that you purchased, it's going to take 30, 40 minutes, probably minimum, if not longer. God forbid it's portable. It's going to take even way longer. You have to calibrate it. So now, let's say it's a sergeant, lieutenant, whoever at a law enforcement agency, they're going to now have to go learn that process in depth. They're going to have to be trained on it just to simply, within reason, turn it on. And that in itself is such a massive barrier to entry that people miss, I think, in this space. So the enterprise grade VR, well, the demand they have beyond consumer tech is that practical aspect. How do we make it work for us? So for example, we don't require an internet connection. Yeah, we serve updates, but it doesn't hook up to your network, internet. And it doesn't involve the IT department. These are massive barriers to entry for an agency when it comes to that. And I think that's drastically overlooked. You're essentially trying to capstone this, trying to take an incredibly capable but complex technology and make it as accessible as possible to the end user. That is really where we come in. Yeah, there's a lot of other things of the software itself and giving them the tools to train themselves. It's all part of the bigger picture, but part of that, again, is making it accessible at the end of the
day. Great points. And I think you hit it right on the head to try to differentiate those. And I think part of it is, right, some of those headsets were that was all that was available. And now they're realizing that we need enterprise-based products. So I commend you for, stepping up and doing that, because that's going to be a big deal, not just for control and security reasons and privacy reasons, but, for longevity to make these things work.
Yeah. Law enforcement agencies, unfortunately, are a huge target for cyber attacks, huge targets for, we'll just use the normal term of being hacked or whatnot being phished, right? Where servers go down, their systems go down. It's just unfortunately the nature of the beast. So they're very hesitant to adopt technologies that have any internet network connectivity because it becomes such a nuanced thing. So it's little pieces like that that really come into play where, again, we can take that technology and put it in a form factor that's extremely practical, extremely efficient to use and set up, and be able to use, and again, the kind of environments they're going to be in, right? Whether it's a mat room or whether it's a classroom. Our heart is in law enforcement at the end of the day, but there's so many law enforcement adjacent agencies, like high schools with criminal justice programs, with public safety programs, your community colleges that have an academy, or even just straight up training academies. We got to be able to adapt to their environment. And again, comes back to that application specific piece, which unfortunately you'll probably hear several more times throughout this.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, it's a great avenue toward the next question I want to go with you here is how has the response been with different agencies, security teams, and maybe even training organizations? You mentioned schools that you partner with so far with the Peerless system.
Yeah, it's truthfully been nothing short of incredible. I know that's probably an obvious answer and a little bit hokey. But over the last 8 years, and obviously, especially these last 11 months with Peerless, I've seen people really value that we actually listen to their needs and feedback. Again, I'm very ingrained in the technology. It's where my expertise lies, really. I was the CTO at the past company and the CEO now, but ultimately, the technology aspect and understanding it is, again, making it work for them. So, for example, if you were really, and you are obviously, but very tech literate on a very specific subject, a lot of that could be quantified by how well you can dumb it down and explain it, right? And that's analogous to the process that a good vendor will do in these contexts, especially selling to a government agency, which is even more farther removed generally, just with how they work. So whatever you can do to apply that goes a long way. And long story short, they've been super happy being able to see that this kind of technology is available and really accessible to them. Again, it's huge. They have children that have VR headsets or themselves that have VR headsets and understand to a certain extent what's capable, but again, it's just not for their use out of the gate. And that's where someone like us comes in. And I would say the final piece is we epitomize putting the trainer in control. So I would say beyond the practicality aspect I've been already singing the praises on is the open-ended nature of Peerless. Every simulator out there delegates scenarios created by the vendor. And I'll give credit where it's due. Some of the newer vendors are definitely adding customization pieces, but they still don't really hit the nail on the head. They're still coming from that original direction of scenario-based content that the vendor makes. We come from the opposite direction where we give you the tools, the environments, the abilities, the options to create your own, not only environments, but your scenarios. That way, when we have any kind of agency, they can train how they want. I can tell you right now, working with thousands of agencies, a sheriff's office in Tennessee versus a municipality in California are going to have completely different training objectives, things they actually deal with in the real world, even if there is a ton of overlap in what they do. And having a simulator that's flexible to those needs is important. It's driven by the trainer. So again, you're getting that much closer to the real world experience you'd have versus a simulator that sells to everyone across the country, even international. It has these one size fits all scenarios. I find many projector-based sims, for example, and even a lot of the VR ones come with military scenarios because it's sold to all these other users and they have to make the content. So as far as the response, it's definitely practicality is huge, but also the open-ended nature, the sandbox nature to it has just been above and beyond. I don't want to say it's what I expected, but I've been very grateful for the obnoxiously positive response.
That's excellent. That's excellent. I think with that positive response, you're probably seeing what's making Peerless different is doing that because we've always seen it. And that's why it's always been struggle for people to understand. Law enforcement isn't just a stamp. I mean, it goes state to state, and even like in Texas, 240 something counties, you almost have different approaches in Texas. And, we just recently went, I guess in the past 10 years, concerned about just the topic of marijuana and how much is legal and illegal and how much is worth prosecuting versus you hit it right on the head. It's got to be unique and being driven by, and when we're talking about training and educating adults as police officers, it does have to be driven by the trainer with an objective, right? They need something. If their objective is to make sure the trainee has good skills in de-escalating a mental health patient that they come across, then we have to have that scenario available for them. They can't just create, like you're saying, these stamp videos and try to make it fit. It's a struggle. And what you're going to find is gaps that you can't train on. And that's an issue, right? If the agency can say, we made an effort to train on these items, we did on these occasions, we did this, we did that. And down the road, that's going to pay off. Unfortunately, you may not know how much it pays off, but you will know, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's like deterring crime. How do you know if you deterred crime? Well, the numbers can go down, but what about the ones that you really don't know about, right? Just because an officer was parked out in front of a business and did his paperwork, and we don't know about the disturbance that didn't happen between employees because they saw the cop car and we can't yell at each other here. We got to go. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and imagine how many folks out there, for example, there's billions of law enforcement interactions every year. And obviously you only see the extremes, not even the right word, but we'll stick with that. The more extreme ones on the news or in media, right? So you're not looking at all the other billions of interactions, kind of to your point. And communication is such a big piece of that. A lot of what law enforcement does is simply just talking to people. And when you have this younger generation coming in that, grew up on cell phones, they grew up with instant messaging, they grew up with social media, they haven't been challenged near as much in real life with confrontation, being able to talk, let alone being yelled, there's people swearing at you, saying all sorts of XYZ. That is definitely a skill set that I think as we go on, we don't appreciate how much the older generation has dealt with naturally, whereas the newer generation doesn't have that. So being able to talk into a mic and actually work on communication is all part of chipping away those kind of interactions in a negative sense, right? You're able to go and simulate a real world context. A lot of agencies will use the simulator to simulate even like a frequent flyer. Let's say a sheriff's office deals with a guy on a weekly basis. Well, the trainer can no problem go in and literally role play as that guy, as if we're at his house, as if he's saying the same things he always says, as if he's calling in that context, the deputy, the trainee by their name. That real world experience goes such a long way. And like I said, you can't really quantify it because it's probably going to be a more likely to even to end in a positive outcome. So all this plays a big role in the big picture, even if it's hard to truly tangibly quantify.
Yeah, true. So let's shift a little bit and talk about how Peerless is, I see in the industry is a little different, and you're kind of opening some new doors. So Peerless VR emphasizes being practical. We've talked about that. Customizable tracking systems, stronger optics, longer session capabilities. So for the audience, what does this headset you're fundamentally different from others? Talk about that product and how it benefits Peerless VR and the customer.
Absolutely. So beyond the core design, the headset is definitely still a huge foundational piece of how the simulator is made, how it works, how it affects the end user, so on and so forth. Specifically on what we use, the Pico 4 Ultra, it's very next gen, essentially a borderline clone of the Quest 3, which is, again, a very, very, very capable headset, very next gen, even though it's about a year or 2 years old now, give or take. It was a huge step in the right direction. So Pico specifically enables a lot of the other following or adjacent technologies in many different ways. So for example, on the Pico specifically, pancake lenses are an absolute massive step in the right direction. Again, I've been doing VR for 8 years, well, really 9, I guess. Been doing this kind of stuff for 8 years. And I came from, again, all the original high-end VR headsets. Before that, right, we're not talking about the Nintendo Virtual Boy and other stuff. Like real VR was like late 2015, early 2016. And the Fresnel lenses they used were significantly worse. I'm not going to get too much into motion sickness because there's other bigger factors that play a huge role. That's a whole other topic. But even the lenses still didn't help with that just because of the smaller sweet spot on the lens. So a lot of times people put on the headset, it's blurry if it's not perfectly adjusted. You'd have to really play with the IPD, so the distance between the lenses, essentially for your eyes, because it's different for people. That made it a lot harder. The pancake lenses make everything a lot sharper, a lot more clear, a lot more natural as far as how your eyes actually work. So that's, absolutely a big piece. The other part that's great about it is coming from a system that used what's called lighthouse tracking, also known as base station tracking, just to be play semantics on it. It works a lot different. That was an outside-in system. So you had an external tracking system. And while it was portable, there was tons of caveats with that. One is obviously setup. 2 is those base stations were very fragile. And 3, if they even got bumped, you'd have to kind of start things over as far as setup goes. So with the inside-out tracking, that really everything's going, which once again was driven by the consumer market originally. You're going to see that as a theme commonly. The tracking system that Pico offers is great because it's inside out, it's camera based like everyone else is going, but it has the ability to have high precision, low latency tracking on things and more just than your controllers. You can track several track devices at once, right? Most sims are limited to 2 track devices at once. And there's usually some gimmicky way they're tracking them, whereas ours are independently tracked. If I hold it out in front of you, and you're in a VR headset and can't see anything except the virtual world, you're still able to grab it out of my hand. And that's an important piece that's needed when it comes to being able to proficiently use your firearm and have those firearm fundamentals, whether it's sight alignment or just stuff like that, working naturally and natively in the system. So that was a big piece too. The native hand tracking is another massive one. Again, Meta did it great. It's just not usable for enterprise. Pretty much end of sentence to a certain extent, unless you're really okay with connecting the internet. And I'll tell you, most people are in my world. But the native hand tracking allows you to just simply stick out your hands. So you don't need to put anything on them. There's no goofy hand tracker on the back. And again, it's going to track all 10 fingers. And this is going to give you that next step towards real world interaction, being able to pick up things off the ground. In a recent update, we just had it so you can open and close doors, for example, with your own hands. Really goes a long way, and we've got a lot in plans for that. Ultimately, those are really a lot of the big pieces when it comes to specifically the VR headset we use.
Yeah, and some great points. And I think agencies use the systems more than understand that in a deeper way. You mentioned it earlier, what you're talking about as far as getting into a conversation where everybody understands it, like yourself as an expert in the business, as an expert in criminal justice areas. That's what we do, right? If we can articulate that and help a jury understand a concept, that's what we're there for. It's not to convince them either way. It's to say, this is what happened, this is what that means, and this is how it develops. So you're doing the same thing, right? This is how VR should be used. So I appreciate that. That's some good stuff. I know on your platform, I think on your website, you talked about some of this, but you talk about high-end lenses. We just talked a little bit about hot swap batteries, maybe your tracking devices are changing as opposed to being in the headset, and specific add-ons that y'all are using. Which of these features are truly changing the game for this training environment with law enforcement?
It's a great question. There's a lot of different ways to answer that, and I've covered a lot of it already as far as, again, just how the technology itself is making quite an impact. Again, it's practicality through and through in many, 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 many ways, but there are some other facets too. Yeah, hot swappable batteries, you should be able to run all day, no problems, no questions asked. You do it without being interrupted. That's definitely a big piece. Even the processor, the chipset is a big reason I chose this headset. It's 2.5 times more powerful than the previous one, and that's what's used in the Vive Focus 3. Vive Focus 3 you'll see in many other simulators, and the chipset and headset was essentially developed in late 2019, so it is extremely outdated. And even just at the surface on, for the sake of selling it and put it in front of people and whatnot, is if someone's going to go and invest in a technology that they're probably going to have at least for 5 years, at least they're hoping for 5 years minimum, we plan to exceed that and then some. You don't want to be investing in something that's already outdated. So even that goes a long way, because that makes a difference in what else we can add when it comes to updates, right? We push updates all the time, once a month. A lot of times they're major updates, major features being added, etc. So the ability to push the graphics, especially just in fidelity, convincing someone they're in a real world experience, is already huge. We can, again, drastically exceed that, because it's 2.5 times faster than the second fastest headset everyone else is using. We can also have more vast environments. You really want to go through a cement bunker where it's shoulder to shoulder, and you can maybe only walk 10 feet and can't see very far. It's intentionally developed that way because the headset cannot render far distances. It can't render a lot of objects. So through some, I'll say, clever development, even though I think it's obviously not the right way to do it, you can still use those older headsets, but you're drastically limited in what your training capabilities are. So that's a big piece of it. Even just the amount of characters. Most sims are going to be limited to 2 characters, maybe 3, and that's like suspects and civilians, just using characters universally here in a scenario at once. We can run up to 10 and realistically can exceed that. So, the chipset here is absolutely massive in what that can do for us, and especially long term, and just people investing in a simulator to begin with.
Nice. Yeah. And I think a lot of that, it helps us in the advancement of this. And like you're saying, that, ability to see an environment for our eyes and brain to understand that, right? As humans, that's what you're, referring to. I think that's a big thing with VR. Is with law enforcement, probably more open to doing that. Being nauseous, meaning officers are going to be in situations where, unfortunately, there's some physical hazards, right? So they're probably apt to use the headset until they figure out they're going to get nauseous. But that as time is changing, public safety has to acknowledge that we have to make sure we can't plan for a building to come down and them getting cancer from inhaling those things. We can, in the training environment, make it as safe as possible. Yeah, thank you. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to highlight this episode's sponsor, which is helping move public safety training forward. At Triple R Investigations, We're committed to equipping agencies with proven tools, practical education, and cutting-edge AR and VR solutions that strengthen decision-making in the field. Here's a quick message about how TRI can support your agency's training program. Is your agency ready for the next evolution in law enforcement training? R Investigations delivers immersive VR and augmented reality scenarios that build decision-making, de-escalation, and confidence in high-stress events. Train smarter, train safer. Schedule your demo at rrinvestigations.com today. So next, let's move into still into law enforcement, criminal justice arenas. What do you think the primary ways law enforcement agencies are using their VR systems in today's arena?
Yeah. So, I mean, just through my lens and my experience, it's a pretty wide open, obviously question, but just as far as their application, again, we try to always broaden the scope on what folks can train on. And inevitably that means it's a wider scope of people that could actually, make use of the simulator, obviously. And again, our heart is still in law enforcement, and really all end users right now that have Peerless, all of our customers, just to be blunt, are either law enforcement or law enforcement adjacent, obviously. But even corrections, jails, I mean, that stuff still works pretty well with just the nature of how the sim works. So who they train in and educate is not limited to sworn personnel or non-sworn personnel. It can go even way farther than just those two categories, explorers, community academies, elected officials. I mean, this works great for Citizens Academy too. So the scope of who it even trains already is very, very, very wide. Again, it's huge in so far for us in high schools with criminal justice programs, public safety programs, training academies, municipal law enforcement, sheriff's offices, all of that. And again, a big part of, how specifically do they use it? The typical traditional simulator and really everything else out there, even the other VR sims, pretty much shoot or don't shoot in use of force. And look, we've had that technology or the capability even in projector-based sims, as much as I'm clearly not a fan and a bit biased. I've always been able to do that. Now, we definitely turn that up to 11, but it's the other stuff, right? We can go from mundane to mayhem, tactical to practical. I got a bunch of buzzwords in my arsenal, but think in the sense of, you can do basic things like consensual contact. You can simply just talk to a guy on the side of the sidewalk, and that's it. You don't have to go that much farther. It can involve use of force. It can have no force. You could train all day simply on active shooter. You could also train all day on other things like internal needs, promotion development, PIO training, counseling. You can do traffic stops. You can conduct investigations. Again, just on the other side of the spectrum, we can go back to full-blown room clearing, building searches, foot pursuits. You can build your own building environment floor plan and copy something like that and work on the tactics side. The goal really is, again, and what we're truly already doing, but are going to continue to iterate on and won't stop doing, which has really always been my vision, is just, again, build the most ultimate law enforcement training tool possible. We just simply cover more facets of training than any other simulator. So all sorts of uses. I can go on all day on that one.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you're right there. It's like, but y'all are listening to the customer. I think you're going to see, or you're already seeing, obviously, some of the questions I had were, like leadership skills, supervisors, having to do a HR session with an officer. It'd be nice to do it role playing first before you actually have to do it.
Absolutely.
And there's other portions of the department, like you're saying, detention. In Texas, a lot of agencies have their own jails, so they have to deal with those people, and they're not officers, but give them some practice sessions. I think it's opening up, and you're right on point as far as I use it as a PR skill to put people in those environments. The public wants to know what officers have to deal with. They see the less than 1% stuff that happens on TV and it gets covered, but they want to know if they can live it. That's the thing about VR is we learn so quickly, and as humans, if we still fail, guess what? We're going to learn, and most likely you're not going to get that the next time. You can't do that in a classroom with a lecture. You can tell them about it, and next thing they're out in the field. And for me, I'd much rather folks give a chance to fail with a headset on and correct that. So knowing getting well when it happens, their response will be better, if not right on the money.
Especially in a safe environment, right? Being able to negate those goes a super long way. And like you said, it can go way beyond just typical sworn, right? It can go to dispatchers. I do know for a lot of folks, we have a courtroom environment, so they'll be able to experience traffic court without having to go in for the first time and having no clue what they're getting themselves into. And then even just on the education side, which you're definitely more in that world, obviously, than I am, but I'm sure you've seen several studies about simply just retention when it comes to information, learning, knowledge. VR is above and beyond one of the single best avenues for that, because a PowerPoint, listening to someone via lecture, even just watching a video, the level of retention and percentage across the board is way lower than actually doing it. And obviously VR is above and beyond. Besides going out and doing it is as close as possible. But there's trade-offs, right? If you always had to go do live role playing and do simulations, well, that's a lot of resources for an agency to go out, find a building where they could do this, get live role players, shoot everyone up, feed them for the day. I got X amount of people not out on a patrol. A lot to it. So just the retention piece already is huge. And then obviously, again, like you're implying, the safety aspect can play a massive role alone, let alone on the resources.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Being at the academy, talking to cadets plus instructors, one of those things was we go through traffic code, penal code, all these different things, but until the scenarios come around, they can't really apply there. But just imagine once you go over penal code, you get 3 to 5 sessions in a headset to apply it. Here's the situation. What would you do? And quiz them on it. Actually conduct 3 to 5 traffic stops in VR before you get out of the academy. Those are some great opportunities. I think this is going to open the door. So talking about scenario-based stuff, use of force, you hit on that. What is the VR hardware itself, laptop and how is it doing today? And what do we think we'll see in the next 5 years on its role in improving this environment?
Sure. I mean, VR alone, again, I've already sang the praises that you need some application behind it to make it work, right? But on the hardware side, again, I think it's going to be just more efficiency, right? A lot of times if you look holistically at technology, it's to make your life easier. It's to be more efficient. Before we had cell phones, it was a heck of a lot harder to get a hold of someone. You couldn't just simply send a text message. You couldn't look at your email. You couldn't receive pictures, so on and so forth, right? And VR is just making that more efficient in a lot of ways. Kind of like we were just talking about, it's the ability to go, all right, well, if I got to go out here and spend the whole day in XYZ, well, even if I still get 90% of that without having to, or if let's say I negate the 10% of efficacy of that by simply being able to throw on a headset in the comfort of my and safe environment in my building, right? That alone is already just such a massive step in the right direction. So VR hardware is only always going to be one part of the equation, but I think you're going to see a natural trend towards this. Even projector-based sims are trying to implement VR. And I say trying because they're still selling projector-based sims. So I don't know what the outlook on that is, but they haven't doubled down just yet.
I think it is. I think it's like anything else, right? If you want that product to stay, if you want your system to stay in the game, I think law enforcement understands equipment, software has a lifespan. I'd love to use it for 20 years, but they know it's not going to happen or it's going to improve. And you probably want to improve it as the systems improves.
More often than every 20 years, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, they replace laptops every 5 years, so they're finding the money. They equate that same kind of thing. That even maybe the training evolves better and instructors get better, that kind of stuff. In the big picture, I know you're building your systems. You integrate it with others, like you said, Pico, and you have to buy some products from other ones. How does this environment? What's your idea on software and hardware? Does the ecosystem look like in the next, let's just say, 5 years? Because that's probably hard enough to predict.
Sure. Ultimately, I truthfully think we already do that. I mean, I think we already nailed the ecosystem. Obviously, you always have to be forward thinking. For example, even though we pretty much had this thing ready to go in as early as March, and we've continuously iterated it. Again, I already have a lot of end users. I mean, we've got already almost 30 systems out the door in just simply 11 months. I mean, we're doing really well. And a lot of it, I think, is already because of the ecosystem. Part of the ecosystem that's important in that software and hardware being married together is ultimately, I think, that almost the main selling point of these systems in a lot of ways. Again, a lot of other vendors are touting features and it does this and that. And half the words don't even resonate with the end user, but it sounds technical and fancy. When in reality, the ecosystem, the practicality, how easy is this to whip out, but also how easy is it to upgrade, how easy is it to scale is absolutely huge. So for what we've done and what we're going to continue to do, at least as far as the philosophical direction we're going in, is absolutely going to be in elegance and modularity. So even just over our old system, no more cables are hanging off things anymore. It's all wireless. There's way less equipment. It's super easy for a trainee to hop in the sim in 20 seconds with all their equipment and be ready to go immediately. As far as the software hardware ecosystem specifically, a lot of it is the modularity. So the way we built our system is it's very easy to upgrade. It's very easy to even split or combine the simulators. So many of our sims we sell are actually 2 or more sims, and it allows you to split them up. So imagine you're a municipal police department, especially if you're decent size, or actually even better example would be a sheriff's office that's full service. They've got deputies out on patrol, but they also have correctional officers in a jail. Well, imagine you buy a simulator that's essentially 2 sims, 2 trainer laptops, 2 sets of training equipment, so 2 VR headsets and all the equipment they need. The trainees will be able to see and hear each other and train together. And the 2 trainers can also run as their own individual suspects, characters, role players, etc. So now you have 2 trainers as puppet masters in the system. But to answer your question, the beauty of ours, and no one else is doing, no one else has seemingly even looked at, is the modularity. So they can actually split those systems. So now let's say in parallel at the same time, part of the sheriff's office that does patrol is over training deputies in one of the systems, one headset, one trainer laptop. And then the other side is able to go and do corrections at the exact same time. So the hardware software ecosystem being expandable, being modular, being upgradable is super, super important. And it's something we are really doing and what we're going to continue to do. So what does the future look like? Hopefully maybe other add-ons and other, right now, for example, we're talking and working and trying to implement AU Fire, which is essentially, simulated injuries. So imagine in the sim, you're going through, instead of some other system that like shocks you or shoots an airsoft BB at you when you're hit in the sim, which is what some others do, which is crazy to me. My lawyer would hate me for trying those out. But beyond that, being able to add that in very seamlessly, whether you buy it from us, whether you buy it from them, be able to simply integrate it so that the trainer has that control to essentially disable one of their arms and have to only use one is part of what we want with our ecosystem, being able to add on to that system later. It'd be like an iPhone. You can still go download apps from a completely unrelated company. Imagine being able to take equipment and from other vendors that you already use and also implement it in Peerless is definitely, I would say, more towards the long-term goal of what we're trying to.
It's impressive. I like the modularity because it is what it is. Plus that, in the long run, replacement. So with your system, yes, with a laptop headset and accessories, laptop can be swapped out in a couple of years if needed, or dropped or whatever. Headset can be swapped out. So that's a great setup. So can you share any recent or coming up improvements that you're making with Peerless VR with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as some improvements, I got to keep some of my cards close. And something I do want to mention while we have it is something that, again, no one else is doing. I think whether it's holding shareholders or just being big archaic companies have been around for 30 years. I don't think anyone has, or many don't have the mindset we do at Peerless with trying to constantly improve. So we have what's called a community hub, where we actually can get feedback from our end users and actually apply that in there. It's mutually beneficial. If I take your feedback from a law enforcement agency who already has my product, already using it, again, we have several already, even just in the first 11 months. For them to be able to give us feedback and idea after using it for a little bit, what would be useful for them goes a long way, because now we can go add that to the next update. They have a better product. They just got what they asked for. And a lot of times to a T, if it makes sense. On the flip side, we still have a better simulator to sell and market now. It makes a lot of sense, all things considered. So we share those new features coming out in our community hub, so everyone has an idea of what's coming out. They can even give feedback before we start pushing things out. But to answer your question, definitely a lot of hand tracking stuff. So the idea is that, again, with native camera-based hand tracking, you have easily the ability to, again, go manipulate and touch objects, work within the environment with all 10 fingers, which is just uncharted territory for simulators. So beyond opening doors and closing doors on vehicles and buildings, which we can already do, that's something big we're looking at. We also just came out with our room builder and environment builder. They go hand in hand. They're kind of one and the same. It's a little bit of semantics, but I can imagine being able to build your own environment with multiple buildings, follow a floor plan, and create a building specific to your needs and desires. That's huge for us. We are drastically working on that, even though we already have a release out there for our end users. Really continuously leaning into giving the trainee more control on the hand tracking side and interaction, because it already works on the headset foundationally with the technology we provide. And that can just be added via software update. And likewise on the trainer side, we want to be able to give the trainer more options, more control, more dynamic aspects. We want them to be able to use this and adapt to their needs on the fly, not needing an update from us when it comes to content, right? Because we don't ship those scenarios. So those are the two big systems we're working on. We have a lot of other things in the hopper, but they're a little early, so can't show all my cards just yet.
I got you. Yeah, that's good. I think the individualism, from my point of view is, it's working. We all work active shooter, and that's necessity these days. But to step it up and an agency be able to practice that in their own school that they've created, their environment in VR, and that's a big thing, right? 'Cause even with me, when you're 25 years on the street, there's probably a couple of dozen times I was at the high school, and if that would have happened, somebody's going to have to get me wherever I need to go, because other north, south, east, and west entries, once I got inside, I don't know that. I didn't go to high school there. I've only been there because I walked it. So those are some big pluses, or at least have somebody else walk an officer through that. So
Yeah. Imagine being able to mock up your school, which I think you're implying here. Absolutely. Make it actually applicable to the building you're going to go clear.
Yeah. And repeat places. And we had a large mall in our property, and it can get confusing if you've never walked it and don't know the back corridors and stuff. Somebody could disappear on you and you're like, what just happened? Well, they went in a back alley, and there's no cameras back there, kind of things. So let's talk cost and return on investment and things for just a little bit. I know you're getting some good feedback, and agencies are shopping other systems. What kind of misunderstandings or even maybe pitfalls are you seeing, or are you hearing in those conversations?
Man, I have this is a loaded question, because there's so much to this, and I know you and I have discussed in the past a little bit about this, and I was excited to touch on this. I figured you'd bring it up. So,
what are your top three? Let's do that. So you don't have to cover them all, but what do you think your top three are?
Misunderstandings, absolutely. That's a good question. So definitely is going to be a lot of the terminology. I think from what I've seen over the years, and having several former law enforcement on my team who also have 20, 25 years under their belt as well, and we're high ranking, so they're part of the purchasing process and the decision making, is just simply bombarding people with misleading terms and using terminology intentionally because the end user isn't going to know. I mean, VR, AR, XR is probably, I think, one of the most prominent ones here, because ultimately those can be used in a way that you're actually propping up your product more than it's really worth. So for example, virtual reality, I mean, let's just define it. You have a VR headset, you have lenses inside with displays, and you're put into a virtual world rendered by a computer in a 3D graphics engine, right? Pretty straightforward. AR, true AR, is going to be a lens, a piece of glass that has stuff projected on it. So your most common one is going to be the Magic Leap. You used to have the HoloLens from Microsoft. And then now the most new one is the Meta glasses, right? That is true augmented reality. And then you have MR as well, which is VR headsets with cameras. So technically we do VR and we have MR capabilities, not too gung-ho about them right now. But again, same idea, that can come via software update. And then finally, the big one, XR. And I remember when this terminology came out in 2017, kind of actually closer to 2018. And the idea was that with AR starting to get some traction, it is drastically stagnated. A little bit of a bump thanks to Meta recently. But those terms are used to encompass technologies. XR is the all-encompassing. It is VR, AR, MR all together, even though they are, again, fundamentally different. VR and MR most of the time is going to have some overlap, since almost everything has pass-through nowadays. AR is a completely different technology. So I think those are intentionally thrown out to confuse people and be used almost maliciously, so that they're not going and really getting the depth of the application of the product and how they're going to be able to use it. And it's just so high tech. Look at all this terminology we use. That would be definitely one of the biggest misunderstandings, I would think, in general. Definitely in general, I find too, vendors aren't out here to, I mean, look, even I'm not trying to have you go look at every product. In a way, I'd be more than happy to, and I definitely would be more open to it than other vendors. So I'm not going to go, hey, go take a look at this other competitor. That doesn't make any sense. So don't get me wrong. But I find a lot of vendors intentionally act like they have the best in the world, and it's all this cutting edge tech that's actually been around for 5, 6, 7 years. It's not actually better in any ways. Again, even the fact that we use the Pico 4 Ultra, the other vendors are using the Vive Focus 3. It's a severely outdated headset. And I used it personally. We even tried to actually implement it in Peerless, but it fell short because of the processing power, of the black and white pass-through, non-color, let alone many other features. Even just developing it for it is a nightmare. The tracking system is very limiting. So I think it's just preying on ignorance, to be honest with you, as far as the misunderstandings of pitfalls. Is a lot of these vendors are out here telling you lots of stuff that isn't true.
Yeah, those are great eye openers, because they do need that, education. I think we've talked about this. Is those agencies, we need to help them understand that, and they really need to purchase the equipment based on what their needs are, right? And I think that's what you're hearing.
Absolutely.
You're hearing a sales pitch that's focused solely on whatever is going on. There could be some different opportunities out there for them. That's a good point. As far as terminology, it's interesting that you're hearing that and seeing that, which means you're trying to educate them and correct them. You're right on the money as far as those systems and understanding, because they're going to have different ones. You're being mobile and more advanced, and everything meets that expectation quicker than anybody else. I commend you for that. A little bit on how these departments are working. Obviously, you're having a conversation with them, or return on their investment. So how do you transition them from that to help them understand Peerless VR system and help them understand how they're going to get a return on investment and where they're going to get that return.
Yeah, totally. Great question. And for what it's worth, I use the term ROI almost all the time when explaining this to agencies because it's such a big piece of what we're trying to do. So long story short, I'm not familiar with a simulator that doesn't have a subscription-based model in some form. And in the past, having shareholders, I can tell you right now, they're pushing, every shareholder, and especially companies and vendors beholden to shareholders, we are not, is always going to incentivize profit, right? So they want that subscription-based model, which is just not great, especially for grant funding, especially with a lot of how agencies fund this in general, whether it's budget or some other means. It's just a barrier to entry. So being able to have you simply own the system and it is your product and you don't have a subscription nor require a subscription, I should say, to be able to use your own equipment is already such a massive step in the right direction. It's not even funny. No cloud infrastructure, doesn't need to be connected to the internet. It's air gapped, right? So again, we can provide updates, but the goal here is that you don't put the whole system on the internet, and sure as heck, not all the time, right? So that's a big piece. To me, I would argue beyond that, in conjunction with our open-ended nature is so powerful because I want an agency to be able to use our system I sell today 10 years down the road with no problems, no questions asked. You've paid for the system. It is your equipment. Your software will still work. Doesn't need to go and talk to the cloud every once in a while, talk to home base to make sure you're allowed to use your own equipment. And that's terrible. That's predatory. And beyond that, with the open-ended nature specifically, it allows them to still adapt down the road. Again, we're the only one taking this approach to create your own scenarios, create your own environments. You define the training, not the vendor with maybe some customizations. Complete opposite. We'll still provide plenty of presets in the sim, which are like pseudo scenarios. But yes, they can go and tweak, but they still have the ability to completely change everything top down. So with that in mind, someone buys my sim, our sim, Peerless sim, whatever way you'd like to put it, they can still use it again 10 years down the road because of what I've explained already, but especially the ability to go and, all right, we just had a policy change. Okay, we just had an OIS. We just had this interaction with a civilian, XYZ, whatever it is, anything under the sun. You can still launch up your simulator, take 30 seconds to a minute to go set up this very specific scenario you're going through or want to simulate, obviously, and run through it with a trainee or several trainees. That ability alone gives so much ROI to this system over everything else out there that it's not even funny. It's just a completely different outlook on it. And that's really my goal. Again, I want to give to law enforcement as much as I can. I want to give them the ultimate training tool and continue the vision I really had back in 2017. And it's big pieces like this that I think are not only invaluable, but a necessity to that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's, I like that you're thinking that way. It's not just, the nuts and bolts and the money. I think agencies are understanding that because, we have to train and do specific things to improve officers' skills. And that return on investment may just be the training itself because, we don't know how many, you could track it, but, mental health interaction versus, hospital versus custody versus even just a basic use of force because officers didn't understand some response and actions on the field. So, I appreciate what you're doing there, changing. Those are still options to return on your investment, but, talking about equipment that they own and they have some dealing that, it's not market driven, right? It's something more associated with that. And, one of those things in public safety that I've always said is, even though it's been used in other markets, we got to be careful with, and we've got to listen to is they're using public funds to purchase these things. Even if it's a grant, it's, from the federal government. So it's a different approach. A lot of agencies, and they should, administrators, cities, respect that. And they're not just going to throw it because it's new tech. They need to do it for the right reasons. You're building your system for the right reasons, which is going to translate into them doing the right thing. So
that's the goal.
Yeah, it'd be great development. So a little bit on that.
Mm-hmm.
If a department or academy, they want to pilot Peerless, understand it, what does the testing and onboarding look like for a new customer? Just kind of, highlight it in a short response for me.
Sure. Pilot's an interesting word, but I mean, in general, it's very straightforward. Again, we already have almost 30 simulators out there in the wild. We've probably got all of that and then some still queued up as far as working with the agency, right? We demo them and they love it. And then we're going to figure out the budget in 26, common with just education and law enforcement. And it's been that case for all my career. So there is that piece. But as far as, trying to onboard it or again, purchase it and bring it to their agency, it's super straightforward, right? ideally they get themselves in the door, that whether they look at our website or other ways, or they hear about it through this podcast, is be able to go to the website, get an idea of what we're dealing with. But the product's so nuanced and so different, we always put on a web demonstration to start. It's very important that they get an idea really what we're dealing with, because the software approach is so drastically out there. It's pretty long-winded. There's some irony in that in many different ways, that if it's so different, then it's going to be much harder to digest. It's going to be much harder to understand, because you're opening a new outlook to what simulators are capable of. Everyone I don't like using. I don't like absolutes. The vast majority in law enforcement, and especially with 10 plus years under the belt, have used likely some form of simulator, and it's always the shoot or don't shoot. They're not even familiar of what that training in a simulator obviously looks like beyond that, right? So it's very important we give them a full-blown, a thorough web demonstration, give you an idea of truly not only what the technology is capable, but obviously the hardware, and really, really especially the software. So even though I can't put people in VR headsets there, it's a good way to start and give them an idea. And then from there, if we got to do an on-site demo and make sense, then we'll gladly come and demonstrate. We do it all the time. Again, I have only the incentive to go out there and show this thing off. I think what we do is great. I think we have a great team. Again, we're not beholden to shareholders. We're not super profit driven. We're still a for-profit company. Don't get me wrong. We got to make money, right? But our business model is not predatory, right? If it's an outright purchase and you can still use it 10 years down the road, instead of making money on the subscription, I'd rather you buy more simulators, or 5 years down the road if we have different hardware upgrade there, right? So ultimately, it's get your foot in the door. We'll gladly give you some information. We'd love to demonstrate it on a web demo to give you an idea of what this thing is even remotely capable of. And so it opened up all sorts of avenues. And then if we got a demo on site, then so be it. We'll gladly do that too. We'd love to show off what we have. And even our turnaround times are quick. So piloting threw me off a little bit, but I hope that answers your question.
No, you're good. That's what I was looking for. How do they get an understanding of it? And I think you guys do a good job with your demo, and we can do it in the field. And I know you're going to conferences and stuff like that, so they'll see it, a live version of it too as well, if they're involved with law enforcement some way.
That's a common way too, is trade shows. And one thing I did miss is obviously training them, right? Something we truly believe in here. And I know my law enforcement guys will stand by me on this, as far as my team members, my employees here, is we don't want to train the agency how to be police officers. It's not our job. And I can tell you right now, again, working with thousands of agencies, every agency is different as far as policy, jurisdiction, the people they're dealing with, even the climate plays a big role. So we simply do, once they get the simulator, sometimes we'll come on site if necessary. It really isn't, truthfully, but we like making people happy and doing what we can, meeting people halfway. But a lot of times it's simply 2 hours over a video call like this to learn the sim. If you've ever bought another simulator, whether it's yourself or people listening, there's a big onboarding process because the setup is so archaic. A lot of times, even if it's a permanent setup, you're still spending 30 minutes to an hour calibrating and setting up and zeroing in and yada, 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 yada. It's so much to learn. Our setup is so obnoxiously easy. I mean, we legitimately claim a 1 minute power on the training, and that's pretty accurate. Maybe 2, maybe 3 if it's your first time and you're running several trainees at once. I mean, it's stupid easy. And even after that, if you use the same room, it's much faster because it recognizes it. So a lot of what we teach is simply how to leverage the simulator, where tools are available, because we have a more nuanced trainer control center, trainer inputs, trainer manipulation over the sim in real time, let alone building your scenarios. We teach the agency how to do all that, and then some as comfortable as we can get them. But it's again a mindset shift of teaching you how to leverage the simulator to train your folks versus I'm going to buy this sim and they're going to teach me for several hours. I mean, sometimes they would come out for days at a time on the projector-based sims to teach you how to set up and calibrate it and then run their scenarios. It's just, again, it's a very limiting approach. So thankfully that makes our life a lot easier on the onboarding piece. But I did want to touch on that.
No, it's a great point. And I like that you're touching on providing a system and application for them to train their people. You got it spot on. You're not training them. You're providing them an excellent tool to get to that point. And the more you customize it to let that trainer / agency teach them their ways, the more apt you are to reap the benefits of that product, you as a vendor and them as a customer. So, yeah, no, I love it. That's what we need. There's a lot of accessories in law enforcement, and the ones that are doing well and still in the business is those that support law enforcement, right?
Absolutely.
Wouldn't you like to be the guy that made the handcuffs to sell law enforcement, right? It's just a tool they need. It has to be reliable, You train them on how to do it, but we can supply the product. And here we are 100 years later still using the damn stuff. So and hopefully you can do it with 100 years. It'll be down to, a pair of glasses by then, but you'll
I
have
think
an
it'll be
awesome
hooking up to your
product.
brain at that point or something.
Little chip on the eyebrow. Well, my next section was hardware. So I think we touched a lot of on this. I'm probably going to skim over this because we talked about the VR hardware and advancement in the industry.
Sure.
The body haptics, that's interesting that you mentioned that because I think it's a good tool, right? Just to give a tidbit on that is when we, in the academy years ago, when we did building searches, we started with stuff called munitions, which was basically using a pistol, but using, a little bullet coming out the end. Some of them had paint, so you could tell them.
Paintball as well, yeah.
Yeah, but all you had to do was put it on a face protection, and it made it very realistic when you got popped with one of those things, realizing that you didn't search an area and somebody bad was hiding.
Sure.
I tell you what, you learn really quick to learn the technique, right? So
yeah,
I don't know if that's going to do it, but it is a help, and it is anytime you can apply that kind of response, interactive is going to be great. Well, it's been a great look with Peerless, and I appreciate your time. Definitely looking behind the scenes and what kind of product you have, and especially the VR equipment today. It's tough to get through and to understand. So I think your help in building those gaps, talking to your customers, and public safety and the military as well, just because they kind of go side and side, right? And with your system, I know it's interactive, but I'm sure there's other industries that may develop later that will benefit. I know I see some fire stuff that's really beneficial for them and how they can train and develop and save lives, if not their own. So thank you for being here today and our audience for listening. And if you want to follow up, make sure you connect to Peerless VR on their website. Definitely request a demo if you're in that part of the world and ready to look at VR. You can tell TJ's excited about it and he's willing to show you a demo and show you what they have.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ryan, I want to thank you for your time as well and having me on here. Hopefully I didn't step on your toes there too much, but I'm really, really grateful for this opportunity. And I think we've had a great discussion. Hopefully we'll continue to educate the world about not only the industry, but just technology and how that works at the enterprise level in general.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. We can definitely do that. I think we're on the same page there and on how to advance this and, benefit both law enforcement and you as a vendor. But, we got to bring those two together somehow, right, to make it a great product like Peerless is doing. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
TJ, this has been an outstanding look behind the scenes of what it takes to design VR equipment tough enough for the realities of public safety and military training. For those listening, you can connect to Peerless VR or request a demo on their website at peerless.com. That's Peerless VR.com. Thanks again to TJ for joining us today. For the listeners, be sure to subscribe for more conversations at the intersection of VR, 3D scanning, and forensic science. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.